This is Eric from Keith McMillan Instruments, and today I'm going to give a quick tutorial on how to use macOS and Audio MIDI Setup to troubleshoot MIDI devices and connections specifically to our editors. So the first thing, to run Audio MIDI Setup, you can go up to Spotlight here and you can just type Audio MIDI Setup. And it oftentimes opens up with the audio devices, and what you want is go to Window and Show MIDI Studio. And here's that. And this is what it looks like when you've never connected an instrument before. It's just a blank slate. So I've got a QNexus here with our old 1.119 firmware on it. I'm going to plug that in, and there's QNexus. And if you look at this icon, it's got these ports that you can, in theory, connect, but I never use that myself. But if you double-click this, you get the Properties window. And what you'll see is there's a device name and manufacturer, KSUMO's us, the model number. This is all reported from the QNexus. And then you get these ports, port 1, port 2, port 3. And this is our old firmware. We used to have port 1, which is the keyboard of the QNexus, and port 2 is the expander port for external MIDI hardware. And then port 3 is your CV connections. And you'll notice you can't change the number of ports here. You can't add or remove them. So one of the problems that might happen here is sometimes you can rename these devices. So if we called this QNexus old, now macOS is going to report this as QNexus old. And of course, if you open the QNexus editor, and you'll see that it's not connected, and it does not see the QNexus at all. If we open the connection troubleshooter, you can see under MIDI ports that macOS is calling these QNexus old, port 1, 2, and 3. And so as far as the editor is concerned, it doesn't see that device. So we want to make sure that if these have been renamed, that we clear that out. And sometimes you can manually rename them. Sometimes other applications, or we've even seen complex MIDI routing or MIDI hub pieces of hardware, MIDI hosts, that can sometimes mess with these settings. So I'm going to unplug the QNexus, and I'm going to just select that. I'm going to press the delete key. It's gone now. And now when I plug the QNexus back in, a couple things just happened here. macOS sees the QNexus, and it gave it its default name and its default port names, and now the editor sees the device, right? So we've responded to the firmware request, and now we can update the firmware and go through that process. And something else you'll notice is that the old firmware with the old port names, those get changed with the new firmware. It updates here, it takes it a second. When that process is done, we're now successfully connected, and there's this second device here, which is the new firmware, the new port. And now the ports, instead of port 1, it's control surface, port 2, it's expander, port 3 is CV. And that makes it so that when you're in Ableton or some other DAW, you have a better idea of what those ports are. And the app also sees those ports and recognizes them, same as the old port names. Sometimes when you're updating firmware, you'll see the old device becomes active, and that's because the bootloader uses the old port names, but you don't need to worry about those details. So this is pretty critical for the connections to work in the editor. So you don't want to rename these devices, and if for some reason things don't seem to be working right, what you want to do is just go to Audio MIDI Setup. You can delete these at any time, and it's fine. macOS will redetect them when you plug the device back in, and it'll work fine. I've got a couple of our other devices here. So if I plug in a keyboard, let's see here, keyboard shows up, and there's only one port. So as long as you don't rename this, this will work fine with our editor. You can also, here's a refresh button that you can rescan all of the MIDI devices. Sometimes that's helpful if you're having trouble finding something. I've also got our Cuneo here. This is a single port device. It'll behave the same as keyboard did. I plug it in, and here's Cuneo, and it's got one port. One thing that we did change in Cuneo is with the new firmware, the capitalization is camel case. So you might notice that if you update firmware from an old one, the port names might change. You might get a second device here. Really, all you need to know is if things aren't named properly here, or you're in doubt, just unplug the device and delete them. And then the next time that they connect, they'll detect right. And then once that happens a few times, you won't ever have to look at the screen again unless there's problems, which there shouldn't be. I'm going to plug in our bot pad, and you'll see bot pad shows up. It's a single port device. And that's all fine and well. We also have our Keyboard Pro, and if I plug that in, when that shows up, you'll notice this is a 2-port device, and there's the control surface, which is the keyboard, and then there's the expander, which is our expander port. And again, as long as you don't change these names, and you shouldn't be able to change the number of connectors and the number of ports on this device, that should be fine. You can, of course, change the color if you're into color coding. Bring up this guy here, make it magenta. Some people like doing that. And finally, I've got our soft step, which I will plug in, and it shows up. And when you open the properties page, you'll see that we also have a control surface port and an expander port. Control surface is for the pads that you step on, and the expander is for the expander port that connects to external hardware.